The great engine sits at the centre of the void, a sphere of incandescent hydrogen that knows nothing of the life it sustains. It is a mindless, automated reactor of colossal proportions, a machine that has been grinding through its fuel for 4 billion years without pause or purpose. At its heart, the crushing weight of gravity acts as a relentless fuel feed, pressing down with a force that defies comprehension. This is not the warmth of a benevolent deity. It is the byproduct of a furnace the size of 1 million Earths, where atoms are shattered and fused by the sheer brutality of mass. Within the core, the temperature screams at 15 million degrees, and the pressure reaches 340 billion times that of the atmosphere on the surface of our world. In this lightless crucible, the very fabric of matter is forced to surrender. Hydrogen nuclei, driven by the weight of the layers above, overcome their natural repulsion and slam together to form helium. This is the primary drive of the machine, a nuclear heartbeat that has pulsed with indifferent regularity since the dawn of the solar system. The eye sees a golden orb, a steady and reliable source of light that has defined the rhythm of terrestrial existence since the first single-celled organism stirred in the ancient seas. But this radiance is a deceptive veneer, a mask worn by a monster of physics. Beneath the photosphere, the grinding gears of plasma are in constant, violent motion. This is a realm governed not by mercy, but by the cold reality of electromagnetism. The sun is a clockwork of ionized gas, where magnetic field lines are woven and snapped like the tensioned springs of a gargantuan trap. The energy generated in the core does not escape easily. It must fight its way through the radiative zone, a region so dense that a single photon may spend over 100,000 years bouncing between atoms in a frantic directionless crawl. This random walk is the slow heat of the engine, a delayed thermal release that ensures the furnace remains stoked even as the surface roils with the next stage of its mechanical cycle. Above the radiative zone lies the convection zone, a churning sea of plasma 200,000 kilometers deep. Here, the machine operates like a boiling vat of liquid metal. Massive columns of superheated gas rise to the surface, cool, and sink back down in a perpetual automated loop. This motion generates the solar dynamo, a planetary-scale electrical generator that twists the star's magnetic field into complex knotted structures. These are the invisible gears of the sun, the hidden architecture that governs the flow of energy from the interior to the vacuum of space. The golden surface we perceive is merely the top of these boiling cells, a thin skin of light stretched over a roiling mechanical abyss. 150 million kilometers away, a small wet pebble clings to the edge of this engine's influence. To the reactor, this world is an irrelevance. The sun does not care for the fragile biological structures that have emerged in the brief shadows of its light. It does not see the cities, the oceans, or the billions of lives that depend on its stability. It simply functions. It is a thermodynamic inevitability, a process that will continue until its fuel is spent, regardless of the fate of the tiny blue speck orbiting in the dark. Our world exists within the heliosphere, a vast bubble of charged particles blown out by the solar wind, meaning we do not merely live near the sun, we live inside the extended atmosphere of a nuclear furnace. The relationship is entirely one-sided. We have built civilizations on the assumption of the sun's constancy, treating its light as a guaranteed inheritance. Yet the machine is prone to fluctuations. It operates on cycles of activity that are as regular and unfeeling as the ticking of a clock. Every 11 years, the magnetic gears of the star reach a point of maximum tension. The fields become so tangled and overwrought that they must eventually snap and reconfigure. During these periods, the golden age of solar stability gives way to a more volatile phase of the machine's operation. The surface becomes pockmarked with sunspots, dark regions where the magnetic pressure is so intense that it chokes off the flow of heat from below. These are the pressure valves of the reactor, the points where the internal stresses of the engine begin to manifest as visible malfunctions. The scale of this operation is so vast that it dwarfs the entirety of human history. If the sun were a hollow vessel, It could contain 1,300,000 Earths. Its mass accounts for 99.8% of all the matter in the solar system. We are the leftovers, the dust that failed to be consumed by the primary ignition. We inhabit a thin sliver of space where the radiation of the machine is just enough to keep water liquid, but not so much as to strip the atmosphere away. This habitable zone is not a sanctuary designed for us. It is a statistical narrowness, a byproduct of the engine's power and the vacuum's cold. As the machine continues its 4 billion year-long burn, it grows slowly more luminous, its internal clockwork shifting as the ratio of hydrogen to helium changes. It is a self-regulating system that follows the laws of stellar evolution with the precision of a programmed script. There is no ghost in this machine, no guiding hand that adjusts the dial for the benefit of the life on the third planet. There is only the relentless conversion of mass into energy, the steady grinding of the gravitational mill, and the cold mathematical certainty of the electromagnetic fields. We are the unintended witnesses to a process that began long before the first spark of consciousness and will continue long after the last breath is drawn. The sun is not our father or our protector. It is the central power plant of our corner of the galaxy, an automated reactor that provides life as a mere side effect of its own entropic decay. To understand the sun is to accept the indifference of the cosmos, to look into the heart of the furnace and see not a god, but a magnificent and terrifying machine. The convection zone begins its violent churn 200,000 kilometers beneath the visible surface of the star. In this region, the solar machine transitions from the slow, radiative crawl of energy to a system of massive physical displacement. The plasma here is no longer a static medium. It roils like boiling oil in a celestial vat of planetary dimensions. Huge plumes of superheated gas driven by the intense thermal gradient from the core rise at speeds of hundreds of meters per second. As they reach the upper boundaries, they radiate their heat into the void, cool, and then plummet back into the depths in a perpetual automated cycle. This is a landscape of constant mechanical motion, where each rising cell of plasma, known as a granule, spans over 1,500 kilometers. These granules are merely the smallest cogs in the engine. Beneath them lie supergranules, vast churning vortices of ionized gas that stretch across 30,000 kilometers of the solar interior. The sun does not rotate as a solid sphere. This lack of rigidity is the primary driver of its internal tension. The equator completes a full rotation in approximately 25 days, while the polar regions, lagging behind, require 35 days to finish a single circuit. This differential rotation acts as a gargantuan mechanical crank, winding the magnetic field lines around the stellar interior like metallic cables being forced onto an ever-tightening spindle. These field lines are not abstract concepts. They are physically anchored to the plasma, dragged along by its relentless motion. At the base of the convection zone lies the tachocline, a thin, turbulent boundary layer where the uniform rotation of the inner radiative zone meets the chaotic shearing of the outer layers. Within this friction point, the magnetic flux is stretched, compressed, and amplified by the sheer force of the differential speeds. As the rotation continues, the magnetic cables are wound into tight horizontal tubes known as toroidal fields. This process, governed by the cold mathematics of fluid dynamics, increases the energy density of the magnetic structures until they become buoyant. Like bubbles of air trapped beneath the surface of a heavy fluid, these concentrated tubes of magnetic force begin to rise through the convection zone. As they ascend, the rotation of the star and the influence of the Coriolis force twist these tubes, kinking them into complex three-dimensional knots. This is the structural fatigue of the machine manifesting in real time. The internal gears are no longer spinning smoothly. The magnetic springs are being overwound to the point of catastrophic failure. The build-up of this tension is an inevitable consequence of the laws of physics. There is no mechanism to bleed off the energy slowly. The star must endure the increasing strain until the magnetic pressure exceeds the containment capacity of the surrounding plasma. When these bloated magnetic tubes finally punch through the photosphere, they create sunspots, regions of intense magnetic activity that act as the visible indicators of the engine's distress. In these dark patches, the magnetic field is so powerful that it chokes the convection process, preventing the rise of hot gas and creating a localized cooling. These are the points where the overtensioned cables of the star are beginning to fray, where the structural integrity of the solar atmosphere is being compromised by the pressure of the dynamo below. The entire solar body is now a lattice of overtension springs. Thousands of magnetic loops arch hundreds of thousands of kilometers into the corona, vibrating with the energy of the churning plasma that anchors them. These loops are not stable. They're in a state of precarious equilibrium, held in place by the weight of the atmosphere above and the tension of the fields below. The geometry of these fields becomes increasingly chaotic as the solar cycle progresses toward its maximum. Magnetic north and south poles within these regions are forced into closer and closer proximity, creating steep gradients of potential energy that scream for release. This is the mechanical reality of the solar cycle. It is a process of loading a cosmic spring over the course of several years, only to have it snap in a series of violent, automated discharges. The star is a clockwork mechanism that has reached a critical threshold of structural fatigue. The mathematical certainty of this breakdown is written into the very nature of the plasma and the speed of the rotation. The engine is not malfunctioning in a biological sense. It is simply following the only path available to a system under such extreme physical duress. The energy must be liberated, and the mechanism for that liberation is the short-circuiting of the magnetic field lines. As the tension peaks, the magnetic field lines begin to cross and reconnect. This is the ultimate failure of the containment system. When the cables snap, they do not merely break. They whip through the solar atmosphere, accelerating particles to relativistic speeds and releasing the stored energy of 1 billion megatons of explosives. This is the snapping of the gears, the sound of the machine venting its accumulated pressure into the surrounding vacuum. The indifference of this process is absolute. The sun does not aim its discharges, it simply bursts at the points of least resistance, casting its metallic guts into the dark according to the cold, unyielding dictates of electromagnetism. The stage is set for a mechanical discharge that will traverse the bridge of light between the star and the world that watches it. The magnetic architecture of the sunspot regions has reached a state of unsustainable complexity. Above the dark, cool voids of the photosphere, the magnetic loops have become so tightly packed that they can no longer maintain their individual identities. These are not ethereal wisps, but structural pillars of force, anchored deep within the churning plasma of the convection zone. They arch into the corona, reaching heights of hundreds of thousands of kilometers, vibrating with the latent energy of the dynamo below. As the solar engine continues its relentless winding, these loops are squeezed together by the motion of the granules. The laws of electromagnetism dictate a hard limit to this proximity. When two lines of opposite magnetic polarity are forced into the same physical space, the very geometry of the vacuum must undergo a radical transformation. In a fraction of a second, the mechanical containment fails. This is the moment of magnetic reconnection, the ultimate short circuit of the solar reactor. The field lines do not merely touch, they snap, break, and fuse into a new lower energy configuration. It is a structural collapse on a celestial scale. At the point of contact, space itself appears to tear asunder as the magnetic tension is converted instantaneously into kinetic energy and heat. The energy that was stored in the winding of the magnetic springs over weeks and months is suddenly liberated in a single violent pulse. This is the birth of a solar flare, a discharge so powerful that light screams into the void across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. From the long waves of radio to the piercing needles of X-rays and gamma radiation, the sun announces its malfunction to the cosmos. The flash is so intense that it briefly outshines the rest of the solar disk in specific wavelengths, a brilliant white scar appearing against the golden face of the star. This radiation travels at the speed of light, crossing the bridge of the vacuum in a mere 8 minutes. Yet, within the context of the stellar machine, This is not a catastrophic end or a sign of celestial wrath. It is a simple venting of pressure from an overloaded valve. The engine has become too tightly wound, and the reconnection is the safety mechanism of the laws of physics asserting themselves. The flare is the spark of the short circuit, the thermal exhaust of a machine that has found a way to bleed off its excess potential. But the flare is only the beginning of the discharge. The sudden release of magnetic energy acts as a gargantuan piston, striking the surrounding corona with a force that shatters the equilibrium of the solar atmosphere. The magnetic field lines, having reconfigured themselves, act like a slingshot of impossible scale. 1 trillion tons of ionized gas, a plume of plasma consisting of billions of protons and electrons, is suddenly detached from the gravitational grip of the star. This is the coronal mass ejection, a physical piece of the sun's internal anatomy being hurled into the vacuum. The plume is a mountain of matter the size of a planet, cast out by the mindless churning of the gears below. It does not travel at the speed of light, but its velocity is nonetheless terrifying, exceeding 2,000 kilometers per second. This is a physical projectile, a bubble of magnetic fire that carries with it the internal magnetic signature of the sunspot region that birthed it. It is a twisted knot of force, a wandering ghost of the sun's internal struggle, now screaming through the dark expanse of the inner solar system. The sheer mass of this ejector is difficult to reconcile with the void it inhabits. 1 trillion tons of plasma, moving with the momentum of a runaway world, represents a kinetic energy release equivalent to millions of hydrogen bombs detonating in a coordinated sequence. The indifference of the machine is absolute. The sun does not aim this discharge. It does not target the planets that orbit it. It simply bursts at the points of least resistance, casting its metallic guts into the dark according to the cold, unyielding dictates of electromagnetism. The discharge is now independent of its source. Behind it, the sunspot region remains, a scarred and smoking ruin of magnetic fields that will immediately begin to wind themselves anew. The solar cycle demands it. The gears will continue to turn, the plasma will continue to roil, and the tension will begin to build once more, indifferent to the trillion-ton projectile it has just launched into the path of the distant, fragile worlds. As the plume moves further from the sun, it expands, its internal magnetic field stretching to cover millions of kilometers of space. It is a growing wall of charged particles, a shockwave of stellar debris that clears everything in its path. The vacuum of space, usually so empty and silent, is now filled with the roar of this invisible tide. The light from the flare has already passed, a silent warning that arrived 8 minutes after the snap. But the physical mass, the heavy, crushing weight of the coronal mass ejection, is still coming. It is a mechanical consequence of a mechanical failure, a cold and mindless threat traversing the bridge of light toward a civilization that has forgotten the true nature of the star that feeds it. The engine has spoken, and the echo of its malfunction is now a shadow falling across the deep. On the morning of September 1st, 1859, the world was a place of steam and iron, unaware that its newfound technological sophistication was about to be tested by the very star it circled. In a private observatory in Red Hill, Richard Carrington adjusted the brass fittings of his telescope, projecting a large image of the sun onto a white plate. Simultaneously, miles away, Stephen Hodgson was engaged in a similar study. They were witnesses to a rare moment of solar instability. As Carrington traced the outlines of a massive cluster of sunspots, 2 patches of intense, blinding white light suddenly erupted within the dark silhouettes. This was a white light flare, a phenomenon so rare and energetic that it was visible to the naked eye through filtered glass. For 5 minutes, the solar machine screamed in light, a silent discharge that Carrington initially mistaken for a hole in the clouds or a local terrestrial event. He did not yet know that he had just seen the spark of a short circuit that had occurred 8 minutes prior. The light-speed radiation from that flare reached Earth almost instantly, ionizing the upper atmosphere and causing a minor flutter in magnetic needles across the globe. But the flare was merely the precursor, the flash of a cosmic muzzle. Behind it, a massive trillion-ton plume of plasma, the coronal mass ejection, was already screaming through the void. This heavy mass of stellar guts was travelling at a velocity that defied all previous celestial observations. While typical solar ejections might take 3 or 4 days to bridge the gap between the Sun and the Earth, this specific mechanical discharge was moving so fast that it would arrive in just 17 hours. As the 19th century world went to sleep that evening, the invisible wall of the Earth's magnetosphere was about to be struck by a hammer of astronomical proportions. The impact occurred in the early hours of the following morning. The first sign of the collision was the sky itself. In an era before the pervasive glow of electric streetlights, the heavens turned into a shifting, psychedelic tapestry of blood red, emerald green and deep violet. These were not the faint flickering curtains of the far north. The aurorae were so bright and so pervasive that they were seen in the Caribbean, in Rome, and as far south as Hawaii. In the Rocky Mountains, the light was so intense that gold miners woke up and began preparing breakfast, believing the sun had risen hours ahead of schedule. But the most profound impact was felt within the primitive nervous system of the industrial age, the telegraph lines. These thousands of miles of copper wire stretched across continents and beneath oceans acted as unintentional antennas for the solar machine. As the Earth's magnetic field was crushed and distorted by the incoming plasma, it induced massive electrical currents directly into the telegraph network. This was not the controlled, low-voltage power from a chemical battery. This was raw, celestial electricity. In telegraph offices across Europe and North America, the machines began to malfunction in ways that bordered on the supernatural. Operators were shocked by their equipment, sparks leaping from the keys and burning their hands. In some stations, the paper ribbons used to record the dots and dashes of Morse code burst into flames. The most terrifying realization came when operators disconnected their batteries, hoping to save their equipment. To their astonishment, the machines continued to chatter. The phantom electricity induced by the solar storm was so powerful that the telegraph lines could function without any human-made power source. For hours, the world's communication network was powered by the sun itself, a ghost in the machine that hissed and crackled with the energy of a star. This was the Carrington event, the first recorded warning that the solar machine does not respect human boundaries. It was a mechanical interaction between a massive, unfeeling reactor and the delicate tools of a developing civilization. The copper wires of the 19th century were a simple technology, yet they were enough to capture the stray energy of a solar malfunction and turn it into a destructive force. The event proved that we do not live in isolation from the sun. We are connected to its internal workings by the invisible threads of electromagnetism. The aftermath of the storm left the world in a state of quiet shock. The fires were extinguished, the aurora faded into the blue of morning, and the telegraph lines eventually returned to the control of their human masters. But the lesson was clear. The sun is a machine of immense power, and its discharges are not mere curiosities for astronomers to ponder. They are physical events with the capacity to seize control of our technology, to bypass our switches, and to melt our infrastructure. In 1859, the damage was limited by the simplicity of the era. There were no power grids to collapse, no satellites to be fried in the vacuum, and no microchips to be scrambled by a surge of cosmic radiation. The Carrington event was a shot across the bow, a demonstration of what happens when the gears of the sun and the gears of human progress grind against one another. It was the moment humanity realized that the golden light of the star carries a hidden, mechanical threat, one that would only grow more dangerous as we built our future out of metal and electricity. The solar machine does not operate at a constant or predictable pace. It possesses a heartbeat, a rhythmic oscillation of magnetic activity that spans approximately 11 years. This cycle is the inevitable result of the solar dynamo, the internal mechanism that converts the kinetic energy of churning plasma into magnetic force. As the years pass, the magnetic field of the star undergoes a complete reversal. What was once north becomes south, and the entire magnetic architecture is dismantled and rebuilt. This process is not a smooth transition. It is a period of increasing mechanical agitation, a slow winding of the cosmic spring that eventually reaches a point of explosive release. In the year 2019, as the previous cycle drew to a quiet close, a panel of experts gathered to forecast the intensity of the coming phase. The consensus at that time was one of relative quietude. Based on the declining strength of the cycles observed over the late 20th century, the prediction for solar cycle 25 suggested a weak, unremarkable period of activity. It was expected to be one of the quietest cycles in a century, a slow turning of the gears that would offer little threat to the electronic nervous system of our world. But the sun is not bound by the statistical models of human observers. It is a machine of fluid dynamics and chaotic variables that often defies the linear logic of our simulations. As the machine transitioned into its 25th cycle, it immediately began to outpace the modest expectations set for it. By the time the year 2023 arrived, the number of sunspots, those dark magnetic pressure valves, was already nearly double what the initial models had suggested. The star was not waking up slowly, it was surging. The frequency of high-energy flares and coronal mass ejections began to climb with a ferocity that caught the scientific community off guard. This is the mechanical reality of the present moment. The solar machine is running at a higher rate of revolutions per minute than its anticipated safety protocols intended. The approach toward the solar maximum is like a massive industrial engine being pushed toward its red line. The magnetic field lines are being twisted more tightly and more frequently than they have been in decades. This is not a gradual increase in warmth, it is a violent escalation of mechanical stress within the plasma. Every sunspot that emerges is a site of potential failure, a localized region where the magnetic tension is reaching a snapping point. The star roils with a higher degree of agitation, its surface a chaotic landscape of erupting loops and snapping filaments. The internal dynamo has accelerated, and with it, the likelihood of a catastrophic discharge that could bridge the gap to Earth has increased exponentially. This mechanical surge occurs at a time when our civilization has never been more vulnerable. We have spent the last several decades building a world that is entirely dependent on the stability of the electromagnetic spectrum. Our satellites, our high-voltage power grids, and our global communication networks are all calibrated to the behavior of a quiet sun. We have constructed a fragile empire of silicon and glass upon a foundation of shifting fire. As the solar machine enters this period of heightened agitation, our electronic world sits directly in the path of its potential exhaust. A single large-scale event, comparable to the discharges of the 19th century, would not merely spark a few telegraph lines, it would strike at the very heart of the digital age. The failure of the 2019 predictions serves as a stark reminder of our limited understanding of the engine. We are observing a machine of such vast proportions and complexity that our finest models are often little more than educated guesses. The sun does not follow a human script. It follows the unyielding laws of physics, which can produce sudden and extreme deviations from the norm. As we move deeper into the maximum of solar cycle 25, the tension continues to mount. The gears are grinding faster, the plasma is churning with greater violence, and the star remains an indifferent reactor, oblivious to the fact that its increased activity is a direct threat to the technological species that watches it from the dark. The internal architecture of the Sun is currently in a state of maximum disorder. The magnetic field lines, which during the solar minimum were neatly aligned like the stripes on a ball, are now a tangled mess of knots and loops. This complexity is the fuel for the coming storms. Each knot represents a massive reservoir of potential energy, a spring that has been wound until it can no longer hold its shape. When these knots fail, they do so with a mechanical precision that ignores the consequences for anything in their path. We are currently witnessing the Sun at its most agitated, a machine running hot and fast, its internal pressures reaching a threshold that history suggests will end in a massive, outward venting of energy. This period of heightened RPM creates a state of constant low-level atmospheric turbulence for our planet, even before a major strike occurs. The upper atmosphere expands and contracts in response to the increased ultraviolet radiation, creating drag on satellites and shortening their operational lives. The ionosphere, the layer of the atmosphere that reflects radio waves, becomes erratic, causing GPS signals to flicker and fade. These are the early warning signs, the vibrations felt in the floor of the factory before a major piece of machinery fails. The solar machine is telling us that it is no longer in its resting state. It is active, it is agitated, and it is moving toward a peak of activity that our modern infrastructure has never truly been tested against. The quiet of the previous decades was an anomaly. The current violence is the machine returning to its true, unbridled nature. The solar machine does not strike with a single weapon. It employs two distinct modes of mechanical discharge, separated by both the nature of their energy and the speed of their arrival. When the magnetic gears of a sunspot region finally fail, the first manifestation of that collapse is the solar flare. This is a pulse of pure electromagnetic radiation, a sudden and blinding flash that spans the entire spectrum from radio waves to high-energy gamma rays. Because this discharge is composed of light, it travels at the ultimate cosmic speed limit. In precisely 8 minutes and 20 seconds, this radiation crosses the 150 million kilometre gulf between the star and our world. It arrives without warning, a silent and instantaneous blow to the Earth's dayside hemisphere. The impact of an X-class flare, the most powerful category of these events, is felt first in the upper reaches of the atmosphere. The radiation slams into the ionosphere, a layer of the sky where atoms are already thin and susceptible to change. The flare does not merely warm this air, it shatters it. It strips electrons from their parent nuclei in a process of massive ionization, turning the upper atmosphere into a dense conductive soup of charged particles. This sudden thickening of the ionosphere acts as a wall for high-frequency radio waves. Signals that usually bounce off this layer to travel across the globe are instead swallowed or scattered. For the duration of the flare, the digital nervous system of the planet experiences a radio blackout. Ships at sea, aircraft over the poles, and emergency broadcasters find themselves shouting into a void. This is the lightning flash of the solar machine, a surge of pure energy that disrupts the air itself. But the flare is merely the light from the muzzle. The second, far more physical discharge is the coronal mass ejection. While the flare is a release of energy, the mass ejection is a release of matter, a trillion-ton plume of stellar guts. This is a physical cloud of plasma, a churning mass of billions of protons and electrons that were once part of the star's very body. This plasma is not merely hot gas. It is a coherent structure of charged particles bound together by its own internal magnetic field, a wandering ghost of the sun's internal architecture. The speed of this physical projectile is lower than that of light, yet it remains a terrifying mechanical reality. A high-velocity ejection can travel at over 2,000 kilometers per second. At this rate, the cloud of stellar matter bridges the distance to Earth in less than 20 hours. It is a mountain of mass moving with the momentum of a runaway world. If the flare is the lightning, the coronal mass ejection is the thunderous shockwave that follows. However, in the vacuum of space, this thunder possesses a physical weight that radiation lacks. The flare ionizes the air, but the mass ejection crushes the planet's magnetic defenses. As this cloud of plasma screams through the void, it behaves like a celestial snowplow. It sweeps up the slower-moving particles of the solar wind, building a dense shock front of high-energy protons at its leading edge. This wall of radiation is a lethal environment for any satellite or astronaut caught in its path. The solar machine is essentially venting its internal pressure by hurling a piece of its own anatomy into the dark. This is not a wave of light that passes through the atmosphere. It is a physical collision between the sun's discarded mass and the Earth's magnetic shield. The scale of an X-class event is measured on a logarithmic scale, where each letter represents a 10-fold increase in power. An X-class flare is 10 times more powerful than an M-class, and 100 times more powerful than a C-class. This is the star operating at the very limit of its mechanical capacity. When an X-class flare is coupled with a fast-moving coronal mass ejection, the result is a full-scale solar storm. The flare prepares the way by ionizing the atmosphere and disabling long-range communication, and then the physical mass arrives to finish the work. The physical weight of the ejection is the true threat to the infrastructure of modern life. Because the plasma carries its own magnetic field, it acts as a gargantuan magnet moving past the Earth at millions of kilometers per hour. This motion induces electrical currents in everything it touches. It is here that the cold, mechanical nature of the Sun becomes most apparent. The star is not attacking us. It is simply being a star. It is a reactor that has reached a point of instability and is shedding its excess energy and mass in the only way the laws of physics allow. The fact that a technologically dependent species happens to be in the path of this discharge is a matter of cosmic indifference. The arrival of the plasma cloud marks the transition from a light-based event to a kinetic one. The magnetosphere, the invisible bubble of magnetic force that protects our planet, begins to vibrate and compress under the weight of the solar guts. It is a struggle between two magnetic systems, one generated by the spinning iron core of a small planet, and the other a discarded remnant of a nuclear furnace. The flare was the warning, the silent flash that announced the failure of the solar gears. The coronal mass ejection is the consequence, a heavy, crushing tide of matter that brings the raw power of the Sun into direct, physical contact with the world we have built. The machine has vented, and the heavy shadow of its exhaust is now falling upon the gates of our atmosphere. The gulf between the Sun and the Earth is not a static vacuum, but a medium of constant abrasive motion. This space is filled with the solar wind, a relentless stream of charged particles that flows outward from the star at speeds of nearly 1,600,000 kilometers per hour. This wind is the steady exhaust of the solar machine, a thin but abrasive gale that has scoured the surfaces of the inner planets for billions of years. When the trillion-ton plume of a coronal mass ejection is hurled into this stream, it does not travel through empty air. It moves like a massive high-velocity piston through a pre-existing fluid. The ejection carries its own internal magnetic field, a knot of force that remains coherent even as it expands to cover millions of kilometers of the interplanetary void. This cloud of stellar guts travels for nearly 150 million kilometers, a journey that takes less than a day when the solar engine is at its most violent. As it approaches the third planet, the interaction is not one of a solid object hitting a solid wall, but of two invisible magnetic systems colliding in the dark. The Earth is surrounded by its magnetosphere, a bubble of magnetic force generated by the spinning iron core deep beneath our feet. For eons, we have perceived this as a static shield, a permanent guardian against the radiation of the deep. In the reality of a solar storm, however, the magnetosphere reveals itself to be a strained membrane, a flexible and finite structure being buffeted by a cosmic gale. The leading edge of the plasma cloud, a dense shock front of high-energy protons, strikes the sunward side of the Earth's magnetic field with the force of a celestial hammer. Under this pressure, the magnetosphere is violently compressed. The boundary that normally sits 60,000 kilometers above the surface is crushed inward, sometimes reaching as low as 30,000 kilometers, half its usual distance. On the day side of the planet, the magnetic field lines are flattened and distorted, while on the night side the field is stretched out into a long tapering structure known as the magnetotail, which extends for millions of kilometers into the wake of the planet. This is a period of intense mechanical stress for the Earth's protective bubble. The magnetosphere is not an impenetrable wall. It is a dynamic system governed by the laws of fluid dynamics and electromagnetism. When the magnetic field of the incoming plasma cloud is oriented in opposition to the Earth's own field, a process of magnetic reconnection occurs at the boundary. The field lines of the Sun and the Earth snap and fuse together, creating open doorways through which the solar plasma can pour. The strained membrane of our world is punctured, and the stellar guts begin to flood into our local environment. The entry of these particles is not uniform. The geometry of the Earth's magnetic field funnels the incoming plasma toward the north and south poles. These are the polar funnels or cusps where the magnetic protection is at its weakest. Here, the charged particles from the Sun are accelerated down the field lines, screaming toward the upper atmosphere. This is the mechanism that fuels the aurorae, but it is also the mechanism of a profound mechanical intrusion. The Earth is being directly coupled to the solar machine. The energy of the distant furnace is no longer just light and heat. It is now a physical flow of electricity and matter being injected into the veins of our planet. As the plasma pours into the polar funnels, it collides with the atoms of the atmosphere, creating the shifting curtains of light that have terrified and mesmerized humanity for millennia. But beneath this beauty lies a cold, mechanical reality. The atmosphere is being heated and expanded by the sheer volume of incoming energy. The very air we breathe is being pushed outward into space, increasing the drag on the satellites that orbit within it. The magnetosphere, once a symbol of stability, is now a vibrating, overextended structure, struggling to contain the surge of energy being forced upon it by the solar malfunction. The indifference of the void is absolute. The journey of the plasma cloud from the star to the planet is a matter of simple physics, a transfer of momentum and energy across the bridge of light. The Earth's magnetosphere is merely another gear in the larger system of the solar system, a component that must react according to the laws of its construction. There is no intent behind the gale, and there is no mercy in the membrane. There is only the relentless pressure of the solar guts, and the desperate vibrating resistance of the Earth's magnetic field as it is buffeted by the exhaust of a star. The collision is complete, and the energy of the Sun is now being channeled into the digital and electrical foundations of human civilization. The energy from the solar machine has now breached the final defences of the planet. As the magnetosphere vibrates and buckles under the impact of the coronal mass ejection, it creates a fluctuating magnetic field that reaches down through the atmosphere to the very surface of the Earth. This is the birth of geomagnetically induced currents, a phenomenon where the sky itself begins to dictate the flow of electricity on the ground. The shifting magnetic canopy above the world acts as a gargantuan induction coil, and the laws of physics provide a brutal mandate. A changing magnetic field must produce an electric current in any conductor it encounters. The Earth's crust, composed of the rock and soil, is a vast but inefficient conductor. However, humanity has spent the last century draping the continents in a dense web of highly conductive metal. Thousands of miles of copper and aluminum transmission lines, stretched across the landscape on towering pylons, serve as unintended antennas for the solar machine. These lines are designed to carry alternating current, a precisely regulated pulse of energy that hums at a frequency of 60 cycles per second. But the currents induced by the solar storm are different. They are low-frequency, quasi-direct currents that move with the slow, heavy rhythm of the distorted magnetosphere. When this stellar electricity enters the power grid, it seeks the path of least resistance, which invariably leads to the high-voltage transformers that sit at the heart of our electrical infrastructure. These machines are the critical nodes of our civilization, responsible for stepping up voltage for long-distance travel or stepping it down for use in our homes. Inside these massive oil-filled steel tanks, the iron cores are designed to handle the rapid oscillations of human-made power. When the slow, heavy surge of the solar current arrives, it saturates the iron. The magnetic flux, no longer contained within the core, spills out into the surrounding structure. This is where the mechanical failure becomes physical and irreversible. The stray magnetic flux induces intense eddy currents in the structural steel and the thick copper windings of the transformer. In a matter of seconds, the temperature within the machine screams upward. The copper windings, which serve as the primary arteries of the grid, begin to soften and melt under the relentless heat of the unintended surge. The insulating oil begins to smoke and decompose, releasing gases that can lead to catastrophic internal pressure. This is not a software glitch or a temporary flicker. It is the physical destruction of the grid's most vital components by a remote reactor 150 million kilometers away. The failure of a single transformer is a localized disaster, but the power grid is a highly interconnected system. When one node is lost, the load is instantaneously shifted to the neighbouring transformers, which are already labouring under the same solar-induced stress. A cascading failure begins to ripple across the map. Circuit breakers trip in a futile attempt to isolate the damage, but the solar surge is too pervasive and too persistent. Entire regions of the planet can be plunged into darkness in a matter of minutes as the digital nervous system of the grid collapses under the weight of the star's exhaust. Our silicon-based civilization is a delicate lace of circuitry, a fragile web of logic gates and microscopic pathways etched into slivers of sand. We have built our world on the assumption that electricity is a controlled and predictable resource, a tamed beast that follows our commands. But the solar machine is a much larger and cruder engine. It operates on a scale of power that makes our most advanced technologies look like toys. When the trillion-ton plume of plasma strikes, the delicate precision of the microchip is overwhelmed by the raw, unrefined force of the stellar discharge. In the clean rooms and data centers that power our modern existence, the effects are subtle but devastating. The ionization of the atmosphere and the fluctuations in the magnetic field can cause single-event upsets in microprocessors, tiny flickers of energy that flip a 0 to a 1, corrupting data and crashing systems. The global positioning system, which provides the timing and navigation for everything from high-frequency trading to the landing of aircraft, begins to stutter as the signals are refracted by the turbulent ionosphere. The lace of our circuitry is being torn by a cosmic gale. There is a profound irony in this mechanical confrontation. We have used our mastery of electromagnetism to build a world of unprecedented complexity and connectivity, yet it is that very connectivity that makes us vulnerable to the star that birthed us. Every mile of wire we string, every satellite we launch, and every chip we manufacture is a new nerve ending that the solar machine can touch. We are a species that has built an empire of light, only to find that the source of that light is a mindless reactor capable of reclaiming the energy it once gave so freely. The delicate gears of human progress are being ground against the massive, unyielding gears of the sun, and for the first time in our history, we are realizing that our digital world is held together by the thinnest of magnetic threads. The sentinels of the modern age drift in the silence of the void, positioned at the precise point where the gravity of the sun and the earth reach a state of equilibrium. This location, known as Lagrange Point 1, sits 1,500,000 kilometers from our world, providing an unobstructed view of the solar machine. Here, a network of sophisticated satellites acts as the early warning system for a civilization built on electricity. Among these protocols is the 3i Atlas, a coordinated monitoring framework designed to detect the first signs of a mechanical failure on the solar surface. These silicon watchers are equipped with coronagraphs that mask the blinding light of the sun to reveal the faint wispy corona, and magnetometers that feel the invisible pulse of the solar wind. They are the outposts of human reason, tasked with translating the mindless churning of the star into data that can save a global economy. However, the recent solar event has exposed a terrifying gap in this technological shield. The 3i Atlas protocol relies on specific thresholds to trigger alerts: the brightness of a flare, the speed of the ejector, and the orientation of the magnetic field. In this instance, the solar machine performed with a ferocity that bypassed the standard predictive models. The coronal mass ejection was not a typical discharge. It was a high-velocity projectile that exceeded 2,000 kilometers per second. This speed meant that the window for response, the time between detection at Lagrange Point 1 and impact with the magnetosphere, was reduced to a mere 30 minutes. The automated systems, calibrated for slower, more common events, struggled to process the sheer momentum of the incoming plasma. The technical failure was compounded by the internal geometry of the plasma cloud. For a solar storm to be truly devastating, its magnetic field must be oriented southward, in direct opposition to the Earth's northward pointing field. This alignment allows for the most efficient transfer of energy, a process known as magnetic reconnection. During the recent event, the magnetic orientation of the plume was highly complex and rapidly shifting. As the cloud passed the sensors at Lagrange point 1, the initial reading suggested a northward orientation, which would have meant the plasma would slide harmlessly past our magnetic defences. But the tail of the ejection carried a massive, southward-pointing magnetic signature that had been hidden behind the leading edge. The machine had essentially masked its true intent through the chaotic twisting of its own internal gears. This revelation highlights the profound difference between observation and control. We have spent billions of dollars to map the surface of the Sun, to count its sunspots, and to measure the temperature of its corona. We can see the gears turning with exquisite detail. We can watch the magnetic loops rise and snap in high definition. Yet for all our sophisticated sensors and mathematical models, we remain passive spectators. The 3i Atlas can tell us that 1 trillion tons of plasma is screaming toward us, but it cannot stop the discharge. It cannot adjust the magnetic orientation of the cloud or slow its velocity. We are like children watching a massive industrial flywheel break loose from its mountings. We can calculate its trajectory and predict the point of impact, but we are powerless to halt its progress. The gap between our ability to witness and our ability to act is a source of existential friction. Our monitoring networks have given us a few minutes of warning, a brief interval in which to put our satellites into safe mode and brace our power grids. But this warning is only useful if the machine behaves according to our expectations. When the Sun operates outside the parameters of our simulations, when it moves faster, burns hotter, or twists its fields into more jagged shapes, our early warning systems become little more than witnesses to our vulnerability. The recent event has proven that the solar reactor is capable of surges that can overwhelm the very sensors meant to track them. The network of satellites remains in place, their golden foils reflecting the light of the furnace they watch. They continue to beam back a constant stream of ones and zeros, a digital translation of the star's mechanical heart. But the data they provide is a reminder of our fragility. We are monitoring a process that is indifferent to our presence, a cycle of energy and mass that has been repeating since long before the first telescope was turned toward the heavens. The 3i Atlas is a testament to human ingenuity, but it is also a monument to our limitations. We have built a world that can see the coming storm, but we have yet to build a world that can survive it if the star decides to speak with its full, unbridled voice. The gears of the Sun continue to turn, and our watchers can only look on in silent, data-driven dread as the next malfunction begins to take shape on the golden horizon. The universe reveals itself not as a sanctuary, but as an indifferent factory of incomprehensible scale. It is a workshop of cold physics and raw energy, where galaxies are forged and stars are consumed with the clinical precision of a production line. In this vast, grinding mechanism, humanity is nothing more than a collection of unintended sparks flying off an anvil. We are the glowing debris of a much larger process, momentary flickers of heat and light that exist only because the hammer of gravity has struck the iron of matter in a particular way. The anvil does not know the sparks exist, and the hammer does not care where they fall. This is the fundamental reality of our existence. We are a byproduct of a cosmic industry that has no quota for life and no memory of its own creations. For a few thousand years, we have inhabited a brief and miraculous window of cosmic stability. This period of relative quiet has allowed us to build empires of glass and silicon, to map the stars, and to believe that the universe is a stage designed for our drama. We have mistaken the silence of the factory for the peace of a home. During this narrow sliver of time, the solar machine has functioned with a deceptive regularity, providing the steady warmth necessary for the rise of civilizations. We have used this grace period to compose symphonies, to wage wars over invisible borders, and to unlock the secrets of the atom. Every song ever written, every empire that has risen and fallen, and every scientific discovery that has expanded our horizon has occurred within this fleeting moment of solar calm. Yet, against the scale of the star, the totality of human history is reduced to an irrelevance. The Sun possesses no consciousness, no intent, and no awareness of the biological lace that has grown on the surface of its third satellite. It is a mindless reactor that follows the dictates of electromagnetism and gravity. What we perceive as a catastrophic solar storm, a force capable of silencing our global communications and plunging our cities into darkness, is, in the context of the star's life, nothing more than a single mechanical sneeze. It is a minor adjustment of magnetic field lines, a routine venting of internal pressure that occurs because the laws of physics demand it. The star does not aim its discharges at us. It simply sheds its excess energy into the vacuum, and we happen to be standing in the way of the exhaust. There is a cold terror in this realization. Our entire digital heritage, the vast libraries of human knowledge stored in the pulses of electrons and the orientation of magnetic domains, could be erased by a single, unthinking gesture from a star that does not even know we are there. The monuments we have built to our own greatness are made of materials that the sun can melt or scramble without effort. We are a species that has defined itself by its ability to remember and to record, yet we remain entirely dependent on a foundation of shifting fire that has no capacity for memory. The universe is a machine that recycles its parts, and the atoms that currently form our bodies and our machines will eventually be reclaimed by the same furnace that now threatens them. This perspective strips away the vanity of human endeavour. It forces an acknowledgement that the stability we rely upon is a temporary condition, a fluke of orbital mechanics and stellar timing. The empires of silicon and glass are not the culmination of a cosmic plan. They are fragile structures built during a lull in the factory's operation. When the gears shift and the pressure builds, the machine does not pause to consider the delicate lives it might extinguish. It simply continues its automated work, fusing hydrogen into helium and casting its light into the dark. We are the witnesses to a process that is both magnificent and terrifying, a story of survival written in the shadow of a giant that is oblivious to our existence. The songs we sing and the wars we fight are the sounds of sparks trying to find meaning in the brief journey from the anvil to the floor, while the factory continues its cold mechanical churning, indifferent to the light it creates or the darkness it will eventually leave behind. The indifference of the cosmos is not a form of cruelty, but a form of purity. The sun does not hate the life it threatens any more than it loves the life it sustains. It is a process of pure, unadulterated existence. In this mechanical landscape, the importance we assign to our history is a localized phenomenon, a subjective value created by the sparks themselves. We have spent our brief moment of consciousness naming the stars and measuring the speed of light, as if by understanding the factory we could somehow gain a seat at the table of its management. But the factory has no management, it only has laws. The realization that our entire existence could be silenced by a routine solar fluctuation is the ultimate lesson in humility. It reminds us that we are guests in a house that was not built for us, living on a timeline that is not our own. Our empires of glass and silicon are beautiful, intricate, and profound, but to the cold machine of the universe they are merely dust waiting to be scattered by the next breath of a star. Yet, within the gears of this unfeeling factory, a profound and quiet miracle has occurred. A small portion of the matter forged in the hearts of the ancient stars has organized itself into a form that can perceive the very system that created it. We are the witness. We are the eyes and the mind of a universe that for billions of years operated in total darkness and silence. In the cold and mindless churning of the solar machine, a biological complexity has emerged that possesses the unique capacity to feel, to reason, and to understand. This is the great anomaly. A blind system has produced a seeing part. We are the only segment of the cosmic engine that has developed the ability to look back at the furnace and ask why it burns. There is a quiet intellectual defiance in our response to the solar threat. We do not fall to our knees in terror before the arrival of an X-class flare, nor do we offer sacrifices to appease the coming of a coronal mass ejection. Instead, we build telescopes. We launch satellites into the direct line of fire. We have spent our brief window of consciousness mapping the very furnace that threatens our existence. We have decoded the language of light, using spectroscopy to reveal the chemical composition of a star we can never touch. We have listened to the vibrations of the solar interior through helioseismology, turning the chaotic roar of the convection zone into a detailed map of the star's internal architecture. This is our defiance: to know the monster, to measure its heartbeat, and to predict its malfunctions with the cold, sharp tools of reason. The human endeavour is not a struggle against a vengeful god, but the emergence of awareness within a system that has no inherent meaning. The universe does not care if we succeed or fail, but we care. That care is the most powerful force in the solar system, a small but intense light that challenges the vast cold indifference of the vacuum. We have taken the raw, unrefined power of the sun and used it to fuel our own curiosity. We have turned the threat of the Carrington event into a lesson, and the violence of Solar Cycle 25 into a comprehensive dataset. In doing so, we have transformed the universe from a mindless factory into a place with a story. We are the part of the machine that has decided that the machine is worth knowing. Our scientific data, the endless streams of binary signals sent back by our sentinels in the void, are not just numbers. They are the chapters of a story we're writing about our place in the cosmos. Every measurement of a magnetic field, every image of a sunspot, and every calculation of plasma velocity is an act of translation. We are turning the churning of atoms into a narrative of survival. We take the noise of the solar reactor and find the signal of our own future. This process of observation is what gives the universe its value. Without the witness, the sun would burn in a vacuum of meaning, its light falling on dead rocks for an eternity of silence. Because we are here, the light is seen, the heat is felt, and the danger is understood. This awareness is a fragile thing, a thin layer of thought stretched over an abyss of physical force. Yet, it is in this fragility that our true strength lies. The sun burns because it must. It is a slave to the laws of nuclear fusion and gravitational collapse. It cannot choose to dim its light or hold back its plasma. We, however, live because we choose to. We have taken the blind, mechanical churning of atoms and woven it into a purpose. We have built a world of silicon and glass not because it was easy, but because it was the only way to extend our reach into the dark. We are the part of the machine that has developed the will to persist, to learn, and to witness the unfolding of time. In the face of the solar maximum, our telescopes remain pointed at the golden disk, recording every flare and every eruption with clinical precision. We are the chroniclers of the star's unrest. We do not look away from the furnace. We stare into its heart, seeking to understand the laws that govern its malfunctions. This is the essence of the human spirit, to be a small, unintended spark that refuses to be extinguished without first understanding the fire. We are the witness who turns the blind, mechanical churning of atoms into a story of survival. Our existence is a defiant act of observation, a way of saying to the unfeeling vacuum that we were here, we saw the light, and we understood the machine that gave it to us. The star may be 1,000,000 times larger than our world, but it possesses not a fraction of the consciousness that allows us to name it. In the cold geometry of the cosmos, we are the only ones who know that the story is being told. The sun remains a prisoner of its own mass, an incandescent engine that burns because the laws of physics leave it no other choice. It does not possess the luxury of hesitation or the capacity for rest. It is a 4-billion-year-old reaction that will continue until its fuel is exhausted, and its gravity can no longer sustain the fire. There is no nobility in its light, only the relentless, automated fulfillment of a thermodynamic mandate. In contrast, the life that clings to the third planet is a miracle of choice and contingency. We do not exist because the universe requires us. We exist because, against all statistical probability, a sequence of biological accidents has resulted in a species that refuses to let the fire go out. We live because we choose to, creating meaning in a vacuum that offers none. This fragility is not a flaw in our design, but the very source of our beauty. A diamond is durable, but it is the ephemeral bloom of a flower that commands our attention. We are the ephemeral bloom of the solar system, a brief and brilliant flash of consciousness, in a landscape of cold, grinding gears. The sun is a machine of immense power, but it is a blind machine. It can melt our transformers and strip away our atmosphere, yet it can never know the warmth of the light it provides. It cannot feel the awe of a solar eclipse or the terror of a magnetic storm. We are the ones who turn the cold mechanics of the star into a story of wonder and survival. We are the ones who look at the data of a looming disaster and see not just a threat, but a mystery to be solved. The motif of the cold machine serves as a reminder of our true place in the hierarchy of the cosmos. We are not the centre of the universe, nor are we the masters of the star that feeds us. We are the conscious observers of an operation so vast that it beggars description. We occupy a thin sliver of space and time, a temporary sanctuary provided by the brief stability of a nuclear furnace. This realization brings with it a profound sense of responsibility. As the only part of this machine that can feel, it is our duty to witness, to record, and to understand. We are the chroniclers of the void, the librarians of the light. Every observation we make and every secret we uncover is a victory for awareness over the mindless churning of matter. Our existence is a defiant expression of life in a vacuum that is largely hostile to our survival. We have built a civilization of metal and electricity in the shadow of a star that can reclaim that energy at any moment. This is not a sign of foolishness, but of a magnificent, reckless courage. We know the risks, we have seen the scars of the Carrington event, and we monitor the agitation of solar cycle 25 with unblinking eyes. Yet, we continue to build, to dream, and to reach further into the dark. We are the part of the universe that has decided that being a witness is worth the risk of being a victim. The story of the sun and the earth is not a tragedy, but an epic of endurance. It is a narrative of a small, fragile species that has used its brief moment of consciousness to map the very forces that could destroy it. We have turned the cold, mechanical laws of electromagnetism into a bridge between our minds and the heart of the furnace. In the end, we are the only ones who can say thank you to the star, even if the star can never hear us. We are the only ones who can find the poetry in the plasma and the music in the magnetic fields. We are the witness, the conscious heart of a mindless machine, and as long as we remain, the universe is not just a factory, but a home. To continue this journey of discovery is to fulfill our role as the eyes of the cosmos. Every new insight into the solar engine, every hidden detail of the galactic clockwork, brings us closer to understanding the true nature of our reality. This exploration is a collective endeavour, a shared mission to document the unfolding story of the universe before the window of stability inevitably closes. By supporting the pursuit of scientific truth and sharing in the wonder of these cosmic revelations, we ensure that the light of consciousness continues to burn bright against the encroaching dark. The journey does not end with a single solar cycle or a single discovery. It is a perpetual quest to uncover the secrets held within the shifting fire of the stars and the silent depths of the void. To join this mission is to become a part of the narrative, to add your voice to the chorus of those who refuse to let the wonder of the universe go unobserved. Subscribe to this channel and walk with us as we continue to map the frontiers of the unknown, supporting the work that allows us to witness the magnificent and terrifying beauty of the machine. Together, we will continue to look into the heart of the furnace, to name the stars, and to tell the story of a fragile, defiant species that found its way in a universe of cold and unyielding light. We are the witness, and the story has only just begun.